everybody. Welcome to the 43rd Asian American International Film Festival. We're so excited today to be joined by the creators of Far East, Deep South. And before we begin, I want to thank our sponsors. So thank you to Gen Z Distinct Dining. Please join us on Friday for the Gen Z Distant Dining event, a collaboration with Chef Lucas Sin of Gen Z Kitchen and Far East, Deep South, where you'll be having a more involved conversation about solidarity and race. You can also order your Yakimian meal kit for the event by Thursday to pick up in Manhattan. And what is Yakimian? It is a beef noodle soup with some Cantonese roots, but heavily infused with Creole spices. We also want to thank our community partners, AALDEF, ADOC, Chinatown Partnership, Chinese Progressive Association, and the Museum of Chinese in America. If you have any questions for our panelists, please let us know in the chat on either Facebook or Twitch, and we'll make sure to ask them. So starting off, Larissa and Baldwin, I would love it if you guys could introduce yourselves to our audience, who you are, what your role in the film is, and also what a summary of the film is.
All right, I'm Larissa Lam.
No.
Oh, that's Larissa.
That's a good one. You should try to go with that. It's the introducee. So you are Baldwin Chiu.
And that's Larissa Lam. Ladies first.
I am the director of Far East Deep South, and I'm actually married to this guy.
Lucky me.
Yeah. I'm lurking in the background if you've seen the film. I didn't think I'd actually be part of the movie, but instead I'm directing it. I have a background in music. I'm a music artist and TV radio host, and I transitioned into film about 5 years ago when we did our short Finding Cleveland, and excited to be here with you all, even though we're on the West Coast, we're in LA. I wish we could be there in New York. Baldwin?
Yeah, I guess I'm Baldwin, not Larissa.
But you have another name.
I go by the name Only One. A lot of you guys might know me as that. I'm a hip hop artist by day, and I guess filmmaker by night, and everything else in between. And yeah, Far East Deep South is a story about my family, and we transitioned from music to film, and I guess that's why we're here. And it's just an honor to be able to talk about how our history really is just an American story.
So our film is about Baldwin's family and their search for their roots because they didn't know anything about his dad's side of the family. We end up in Mississippi, of all places, and not China, and uncover this lost history of the Chinese in the South during segregation and a whole lot more.
We have a Zoom bomber that wants to just peek in real quick. So just wave and say hi.
This is Kalia Chu. She is a lot younger in our film, but in our documentary, she is in there.
And I guess she is kind of the reason. Oh,
and she's about
she
to knock over
her ring light.
And,
But
this is live, everybody.
Yeah,
this is what happens.
But I guess, that she's the reason why we made the film, really, to teach her about her American roots.
That's amazing. I was actually going to ask you guys next, what inspired you to the story? Because, the frame of your film is that you and your family are taking a trip to the South into Mississippi. Did you go on this trip knowing that it would soon turn into this documentary feature?
No,
Nope.
we thought we would just go there,
visit
a gravesite.
Yeah,
my
idea was just to make a home video, and then she said, no.
Well, that's because after the things that started happening when we went on our first trip, as people will see in the film, we discovered all these amazing family connections. And for me, being in California and growing up, I didn't learn anything about the Chinese in the South. Don't think most people did in the country. And so I was just blown away by the fact that there was a significant population of Chinese, Asians in the South that were integral to the communities. And there was a museum in the middle of Mississippi. And I'm like, if there's a museum here, that means they had to be pretty important, and there had to be enough of them to make a difference.
A Chinese museum, not just a regular museum, but
right. And I was just blown away. And so I felt like, this is something that everybody needed to know, the history. I mean, the personal aspect is amazing too, and those discoveries. But the fact that we frame a lot of what America is defined a lot by what happened in the South, Civil War, post-Civil War. And the fact that we've never learned this, that we were there during Reconstruction. It's like, oh my gosh, this blew my mind, only learning about railroads and gold mines, as a Chinese American.
And so I think you do a really great job in the film, creating the story for audiences that have had no idea what the Chinese Exclusion Act is, and also for those who have a similar story to yours. Can you talk about what it was like to balance those educational aspects with the personal? Because you bring in these wonderful historians, but you also talk to people who lived through this time period.
It was very hard. As a filmmaker, people always ask, what was the hardest part of this film? And I said, balancing those two aspects. So I appreciate that you recognize that. We wanted to tell a family story, which is the heart of it. At the same time, we knew we wanted educational elements in it, but, we didn't want to do a typical historical documentary. So it's like a drama mixed with historical talking head documentary. We needed to address people who knew nothing about it, like you mentioned. There's been some great docs that have been done about the Chinese Exclusion Act, like the Chinese Exclusion Act that was on PBS. So our role was really to try to frame it in a way that it showed how it impacted a family like Baldwin's. And honestly, we didn't know how directly it did until we started doing the film and researching.
Yeah, I think at first we thought maybe we should make it very educational. And I think what really started to develop was understanding more of how did the Chinese Exclusion Act affect our family as opposed to just knowing what the Chinese Exclusion Act was. And I think the realization of how it affected our family made it more clear that this probably affected other families as well, not just our family. And we thought that maybe that story would bring a little more to light where people might watch our film and be like, oh my gosh, maybe it affected us too. Maybe we should learn more and find out how this Chinese Exclusion Act might have affected our family or friends of our family, stuff like that.
It's wonderful. And since it is kind of a family movie and you are all together for the whole film, I was wondering, how did your relationships change over the course of filming it, especially like with your dad, because he's so open, he's so vulnerable in film, which was like, it made me tear up to watch. Like, it was so wonderful to get to know your family as well.
Yeah, he's always been very open.
I think he's watching right now, possibly. This was, I think it was definitely a breakthrough for him. I think he never shared as much as he did through the course of this film. And I mean, you can speak to how your relationship has changed.
Yeah, I mean, I think now, I mean, the film kind of talks a little bit about that, how our relationship is now. Like, I understand my father's upbringing a little bit more. When we're growing up, we just figured, oh, that's just how a Chinese father is, and we see other Chinese families like, yeah, Chinese fathers just don't talk much. They don't talk about their feelings. They just tell us what to do, and they do it out of love, and we just gotta. That's just how it is. And I think after this film, and even throughout the film while it was being made, and after the film was completed, and after he's seen the film and sees how it might be affecting the world and schools and education, I think he's. I'm speaking for him now. I mean, he doesn't have a voice in this, but I think he's a little more understanding of what we want to do in order to try to change the world, change how education is taught. And I think we just understand each other a little bit more. I mean, it's not perfect. Of course, we're still father and son. There's still generational gaps, but I think understanding each other and where we both come from has really helped a lot. So I think, if anything, this film might have done some healing in our family, and we hope that other families will start talking. And we know that there's a lot of young ones out there that don't talk to their fathers, don't talk to their grandparents, and they feel like they just won't understand because of the generations. But we hope this film will inspire generations to talk to each other and at least bridge the gap through the stories of commonality and stories of struggle and how we can appreciate each other.
That's wonderful. And speaking of relationships, one of the big themes of the festival as we were watching these films was kind of about intercommunity solidarity and how can we as Asian Americans support and advocate for other communities of color. And something that I absolutely loved about your film was that you devote a good chunk of time to interviewing and highlighting voices of the Black community in Mississippi, where your grandfather and your great-grandfather lived. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what it was like to build those relationships with the community while you were filming.
Well, what's interesting is when we first sought out to get interviews with people in the Black community, because it was something that Baldwin and I felt were very important. We didn't want to have, just Chinese or even white, people talking about what it was like to be Black or what their relationship was with the Chinese. We wanted to get it from them directly. And we actually had some people tell us like, ooh, good luck with that. They're kind of a hard community to crack. And I think, I think anybody in the South has this kind of suspicion of outsiders, especially those of us who aren't from the South, right? But I think because Baldwin's grandfather actually owned the store in their neighborhood, like the moment they found out like his grandfather and his great-grandfather were there in the small town of Pace, the mayor, I mean, we had ribs at the mayor's house, that Mayor LaVon Jackson, who we see in the film. And we were just surprised because we honestly didn't know what we would discover, because we were expecting like, oh, is it like today where there's a little bit of tension, and there's kind of a distrust between the two communities, and maybe they don't like the Asians coming into their neighborhoods like they do, same thing now, there's suspicion. And back then in the early 1900s, mid 1900s, it was very different with that. We discovered that they had a much stronger relationship out of the fact that both groups were discriminated
Yeah, and
against.
I just love the story because I mean I've always felt really comfortable in the Black community. Had a lot of Black friends, and obviously if I'm a hip hop artist, so just in that culture, playing sports and stuff like that. And not that that's the only thing that the Black community does, but then it allowed me to really get to understand them as individuals when I became friends with them growing up, and understanding what their when we would have serious conversations with me and my Black friends about intelligent conversations about what does it mean to be a specific race, and how society affected them, and what are their actual struggles, not just talking about sports or music, but like actual life. And I felt like when we went into Mississippi, we were surrounded by that community. It was hard to ignore and hard to not want to delve in and hear more. And so I felt like as Chinese with history there, we heard from the white community like, hey, it's kind of hard to reach out, and we were talking to them saying like, can you help us maybe reach out to the Black church or maybe some other members of the community? And they're like, we don't really know who to talk to. But then when we reached out directly to them, and we had one of our friends, Emerald Dunn, who's in the film, she reached out to them directly, and she had relationships because they owned the grocery store after my family owned the store. It was very natural,
and it was natural. And again, I think what surprised me is they actually were very grateful that we asked them how they felt and their perspective on history.
Yeah.
And the fact that they had a very symbiotic relationship, interconnected relationship, where they, Chinese needed customers, the Black community needed a place a safe place to shop, where they could walk through the front door and be treated with respect. And the Chinese also provided a place where they could loan credit, and the Black community paid them back, and there was this trust that we were just, that's unheard of today. And we just thought it was just remarkable how they had such a interconnected history together that we don't know about. And I think it serves us today to learn about that history. Hopefully that when people find out about segregation today in history books, Asians don't feel a connection. There is a connection, we just hadn't learned about it.
Yeah, and I feel like sometimes we're just afraid. We don't know each other, so we're afraid to ask each other, we're afraid to talk. And it's funny how, like, amazingly they're feeling the same thing. And what they really want is for us to have the courage to ask them and to speak to them and open up conversations. And I think our community a lot of times is like, maybe we shouldn't say anything in case we say something wrong, or, we're afraid to approach in case we just don't understand and we don't know how to ask certain questions. And I feel like, maybe that's the right time to actually ask. Maybe we shouldn't be afraid, and let them know in all honesty, like, hey, I want to get to know you better, and I want you to get to know us better.
And have a meal. Like one of my favorite lines in the film is when the mayor of Mountain View is like, he says like, African Americans love Chinese rice.
Yeah. And it's always over food, right? Like as soon as we walked into Pace, the mayor
Ribs.
was like, come on over and let's have some ribs. They had a huge Oktoberfest when we first showed up there. And
not the German one.
Not the German one. Well, I mean, they celebrated with beer and ribs basically in that town. And they're like, yeah, you can have whatever food you want to grab here, or you can just come over to my house right across the street behind town hall, literally, and eat over there. And so I was like, well, how about both?
Yeah, only in the South, in a small town, does the mayor of a town make you ribs.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
That's incredible. And as you were talking to people, because I feel like they had saved so many mementos of the past, and like they had the letterhead of your grandfather's store and everything. Were you surprised by how many mementos people had saved and were willing to share with you?
Man, we weren't expecting anything at all. So
yeah.
Just one item would have been a shock, but so many items.
Especially,
we didn't show it all.
We didn't even show it all in our film because it got to be like overwhelming. Like there was actually a keychain that was discovered after, later on, in our film, or like towards the end of filming, that we didn't even include. And
the keychain actually says, "If found, return to Casey Liu." And if you saw the film, the whole film, was about Casey Liu, my grandfather, and how we were looking for him, searching for that history. And
I was trying to find it. I mean, there was a really cool angle, and we even thought about naming the film that way. But I think in the end, there were just so many reveals that we were like, okay, this is maybe for the outtakes, or maybe we can even center another like, sequel out of the keychain.
And we actually have an audience question. They asked,
oh yeah,
I'd love to hear how your faith shapes your life and your work.
How our faith shapes our life and our work. It's certainly definitely a very important part of our lives. We both grew up in the church. And I think one of the things that, we wanted to show, is we actually didn't know some of these stories about Baldwin's dad, and how strong of a role, his faith played with him not growing up with a father. I mean, there's a lovely scene in the film where he talks about, how he embraced a heavenly father because he didn't have an earthly father. I almost want to cry like when I think about that part. And for him, it was such a strong part of it. And there's so many little elements in our film that, we like to credit to God. If you don't believe in God, that's cool. But like for us, we really feel like this story was a God-given story, and was something that we really wanted to tell.
Yeah, it was one of those things where I don't think we could have narrated this, and we talk about this a lot, where it was like, if we made this into a narrative featured movie, people would be like, oh, that would never happen. You're just throwing in Asian people in there just to do it, or you're just throwing in a Bible in there just to preach or something, or you're just talking about how the church helped you. It's like, they wouldn't really do that. No, this stuff really happened. And I felt like this is an important part of history, not so that we could, promote a faith and force it down someone, but to show that this had relevance in history, it had relevance in real life, and that the faith journey can and is natural, and that we shouldn't ignore that. And it was so important in that time. It was so important to our family, and it's so important today to so many families and to that area and into this country still today. So
yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, as we've kind of shown the story, is that some people are surprised to find out that, Baldwin's family is Christian, because I think the stereotype is, Asians are Buddhists, Asians are ancestor worshipers, or, Shintoists, or whatever Asian, religion that you are. And so there's a large population of, Chinese Christians around the world. And so, in talking about diversity, I think it's important to also show those different aspects, not just ethnically, but also when it comes to faith as well.
Yeah, and I loved how in the film we were able to show that the church did something that was very important, which was show love to a community that needed love during a time where they were segregated, and people were just talking about black and white, but then you had this group of people that were stuck in the middle. And to see a church actually address that and say like, oh, there's a need in this community. Let's just serve that community. Let's just give them a place to hang out and play mahjong. So stuff like that.
That's incredible. So I'd also love to hear about what it was like going through all this archival footage, and especially at the National Archives, and kind of what was your editing process too, and choosing what to put into the film and leave out.
We have like 50 plus cuts of this film.
We would probably have like a 10-hour movie if we threw in all the archival stuff.
There is so much, especially when we went to the National Archives in San Francisco. That's where we discovered the Chinese exclusion files for Baldwin's great-grandparents and grandfather. And we didn't know they exist. Actually, it was at an event in New York when we showed our short film, Finding Cleveland, that somebody in the audience actually asked us, like, hey, have you seen the your family's Chinese exclusion files? Yeah. We're like, what's that? And
so the reason we're in New York right now at your festival is because somebody in New York asked us that question.
Yeah. And then, being from San Francisco. So where's the archives where we'd find that? In San Francisco. So then we go back to San Francisco, and, made an appointment, and oh my gosh, we found the files, and there was pages and pages, like probably 100 pages in each file that we obviously couldn't. And the sad thing is, the Chinese Exclusion Act created this law that prevented Chinese and made them put under scrutiny in terms of immigration every time somebody Chinese, regardless if you're a citizen or not, had to come into the country or leave the country. If you're Chinese, you get interrogated, sometimes for weeks and months, and on Angel Island if you came through San Francisco. Yet at the same time, what it left was a written record of Baldwin's family history. That's the only silver lining, I think, through this discriminatory law, is he knows more about his family because they would ask crazy questions like, what side of the street was your house on in China? Who was your neighbor? Who was your aunt? Who was your uncle? We
Who's your
know
dog's
so
best
much more.
friend's neighbor?
Exactly. What village did your aunt live in? What village did your grandmother? What year were they born? I mean, all these things that he didn't know about his family all of a sudden are in these documents.
That's really incredible. And also I was wondering, what has the impact of this film been on wider Asian American communities, academic or otherwise, and how are you maximizing that impact?
So sorry, I say that one question one more time.
What's the impact, our film?
Oh.
Well, we have, first of all, we've been really excited to see that people are interested in finding their roots after seeing our film and kind of questioning that. The other thing that we've been really excited to see, which is our main goal with the film, is to really influence the way that U.S. history is taught in schools. In fact, we just had a school in Oregon, a high school class, U.S. history class, watch our film.
Predominantly white?
Predominantly
class.
white. There's some Asian, some other mixed races. And overwhelmingly, the students were just kind of blown away by this history that they didn't know. And they never thought about Asians as, I guess, being kind of a discriminated group. They might have heard a little bit about the Exclusion Act, but they didn't know the extent of it. They didn't know that we were also subject to segregation too. And that's the biggest impact, is that we already learned segregation. We learned about the American South. For us, we want our stories just to be integrated in that. So when we do learn these things, that classrooms are also talking about how it just didn't affect the Black community, but it affected the Asian community, the Latinx community, the Native American community. Basically, if you're not white, you could be subject to Jim Crow laws, and they were applied differently all across the country. And so, I mean, we don't want to be justified by that, because obviously there was huge contributions of the Chinese in the South in terms of the economy and other aspects.
Yeah, and certainly we wanted the voice and the stories of this, like, of Asian American history to be normalized. So we want both Asian community to be like, oh, I'm not a foreigner. I do belong here, because we have multiple generations of history here. So watching a film like ours and learning about this history through other films should in turn say, oh, well, I'm here and I belong here, so maybe I should get involved. And at the same time, we hope that people that are not Asian watches this film and say, oh, they have history here. They belong here, and we should get them involved in everything that's American. And I think that's what we want people to be educated about. I mean, just yesterday, we were talking about ethnic studies with an African-American Parents Council. And we're talking about I was saying how ethnic studies is really just an excuse to say, you're not from here and maybe you don't belong here, but maybe we should just learn about you so that we can accept you. And that's not really what we want for ethnic studies. We want this to be an American studies class, American history, and say, like, everyone basically is ethnic studies, whether you're white, Black, or in between, because we all came from somewhere else. And having that as core and normalized in American history is really what we want education to understand.
But until we get to that point, ethnic studies is like
it's a good
next step.
It's a good first step.
Really,
but it can't be the end.
Right. The end goal should be American history is everybody's studies.
Yeah.
It's not just story from the white America point of view.
I love that, because I also grew up in the Bay Area, and I went through APUSH and everything. And when we learned about the South, we never learned about the contributions the Chinese had made. It wasn't until I read the book Chinese in America by Iris Chang, and then also got to see your film, that it was really opened this whole other history that we had no idea was opened up. So I would love to continue to see this being played in schools and being used in courses and everything. It'd be incredible.
Yeah.
I would also love to know the relationships that you formed in PACE and kind of with these historians. Have you kept them up? Do you check up with them ever so often? Is it a place you'd like to continue visiting?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like it's home. It's we're still in touch with the archivist at Delta State University. So we're trying to do things together. We're going to be going back out there for a Southern tour, the Southern Arts Tour, where we're
in 2021.
2021. That's hopefully
pandemic pending.
And Mississippi and Delta State University, which is in Cleveland, Mississippi, is one of the stops. And then definitely we want to go back to PACE and meet up with the mayor over there again. And the late Mayor LaVon Jackson, he actually passed away, unfortunately. So he didn't get a chance to watch the film, but we definitely are in touch with the family there, and we want to continue that relationship. And we get emails from the residents every once in a while and say, like, hey, we're following you. and we're just thankful that you're telling our story. So we definitely want to maintain the contact there. We want to go back there as often as we can once the world reopens.
And what we've learned is that Chinese Mississippians are all over the United States now, and so they live among us. You know, there's a bunch that were, you know, in the New York tri-state area, and you know, that's the thing, is they are like family to us, especially Baldwin, because he didn't know that side, and so we've discovered like a whole new family out in the South, and it's just not just South, but everywhere we go.
That's awesome. That's what I love most about documentary filmmaking, I think, is you get to know communities and then become a part of them. So kind of our last question of the evening, what is next for you guys? Do you have any projects or stories that you're looking forward to telling and bringing us soon?
Well, definitely next is to get our film into the schools. And so I guess we can make the announcement.
We can kind of make the announcement right now.
We signed with an educational distribution company, so New Day. And
New Day Films is our educational distributor.
Very soon, schools can go to New Day. They can license our film, and we'll have some study guide, have a study guide available. So schools will be able to license it. We'll be able to talk directly and set up opportunities to speak in schools. You know, if it's virtual, then it's virtual. Maybe it's better that way. Yeah, definitely our future, our near future, is to be in the schools. We really want to push being in the schools, having this as part of natural American history curriculum, and to really open up the conversation about what does it mean to be American? How does our shared history open up our relationships with people of other colors and other ethnicities and other social backgrounds and cultural backgrounds, and to see that, hey, if we could see our history together in the past, then maybe we can better see our history or the way we move forward together in the future.
Yeah, and we've got some collaborations that we'll be announcing, you know, in the coming months with some other organizations and platforms where we're continuing the conversation around our film. You know, there's going to be some social media campaign going on where we're sharing different factoids about history. We just want people to discover more history, you know, even beyond the stories of the South. And of course, he's supposed to be working on a book that I'm helping him outline, because there's so much that we couldn't include in our film, and just about his own journey, I think. You like how I'm talking for you about your book.
Well, we also have another book that we're trying to work on, because something we did not reveal in the film is that my grandfather, Casey Liu, happened to be a very good photographer. He was actually like the city photographer. So we actually found some old negatives. And
there's one photo of his that he took is in our film. Actually, two, the one counting Happy too.
Yeah. So we want to make a photo book, and it's kind of ironic how my grandfather was really into photography. And then as I was growing up, my dad never knew him, but then he was kind of into photography. And then we both obviously didn't know my grandfather, and here I am making a film, right? So it's just kind of funny how history just continues. So
yeah, and if people want to know more about our film or follow what we're doing, they can subscribe to our newsletter or follow us on social media. They can go to our website, fareastdeepsouth.com. We're also doing a series of conversations surrounding our film. We just did one called Growing Up Southern, where we spotlighted a couple people in our film, where we dove a little deeper into their stories. And we plan to do another one called Living Southern next, where we're talking about people who are still living in the South that are Chinese. So we're again continuing kind of this story, and you know, hopefully we'll do other projects. We've got lots of ideas for lots of other projects.
And those that know me know that I love dim sum. So
we have a podcast.
We have a podcast called.
We don't eat dim sum on the podcast, but we talk about.
But we do have a podcast called Love, Discovery, and Dim Sum, where we talk about all things to discover, all things to love, and we try to throw a little bit of food in there. In our
well,
talks.
we get to expand these conversations about, you know, little known history, and also about race and culture through our Asian American lens. And so, yeah, if you're interested in hearing more from us, definitely check out Love, Discovery, and Dim Sum podcast.
Amazing. We actually have one more Facebook question.
Cool.
You have a link to the Southern Arts Tour, and are there specifically Asian American themed Southern tours available?
Yeah, I think we're gonna have that on our FarEastDeepSouth.com site.
Yeah.
So you follow the screenings there.
Right. So the Southern Arts Tour is multi-ethnic. I think
Yes.
I don't know if we're the only Asian film, but that is curated by the Southern Arts, the South Arts Council,
Arts Tour, sure, yeah.
Council, and we hope to do more. If you have ideas or places you want us to go, please suggest them and reach out to us through our website.
Actually,
there's FarEastDeepSouth.com.
There's a contact form on FarEastDeepSouth.com, and what we're trying to do is, in conjunction with the tour, is that we would actually set up other things outside the tour. So if it's too late for you to book within the tour and you're in the South and we're in the area, hit us up and we could tag it along
out. And yeah, all the screening information is on our website. And again, to get updates, you can subscribe to our regular email newsletter, and we'll keep you up to date about all things Far East Deep South and beyond.
Amazing. Well, I want to thank you guys so much for being here today and taking like 30 minutes out of your day to talk with us about your amazing film. And we can't wait to see what happens next with you guys.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much for coming.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.